Good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday, May 7th. It is a beautiful spring morning. It's 59 degrees. There's a slight breeze in the neighborhood. I am sitting in my car waiting for the food pantry to open. I thought I would just pop on real quick and just say some things that have been on my mind. And I've made videos like this before. I'm going to take a sip of my water if y'all don't mind. A little thirsty. Oh, excuse me. So, I know that we're in some uncertain, trying times right now. Rents are at an all-time high. Housing costs are just astronomical. Utilities are through the roof. Groceries are very expensive. Everything is really expensive. I mean, right down to every necessity that you can think of. Everything has gone up, tripled in the last 4 to 5 years. And, life as we know it is drastically different. Jobs are not hiring full-timers as much as they used to. Just, there's so much that's different. And, it's hard to deal with, I know. But as I have said before, those are my tomato cages back there. Don't get distracted by them like I did. Anyway, I digress. Like I have said before, getting back on topic, these times are trying and they can be difficult to get through. They are difficult to get through. Let's be honest, right? But all of the other generations have had one kind of hard time or another, right? Some of them harder than others. I know my mom was born in 1934. Unfortunately, she's passed away. She's been gone over 20 years. But growing up, I would hear all kinds of stories, from my aunts and my uncle about, the Great Depression and what my grandparents did to, feed the family and, different thrifty economic tips. Life was a lot simpler then. And I think, that's part of it. Maybe we need to get back to a little bit of simplicity. There's a lot more that we pay for that previous generations didn't. Think about it. Cell phone, streaming services / cable. Back then, not every house had cars. Not every house had a TV. In fact, I don't even think the TV was invented. And if it was, very wealthy people probably were the only ones who had it. The video games, we didn't have all that. We didn't have all of this tech. We didn't have computers, and I think in a way, technology is great, but sometimes it can be to our detriment. I think that it definitely causes, lapses in social skills. I think sometimes we forget how to be social with other people. Case in point, folks used to visit with each other quite a bit, and they still do. But, it was not unusual for someone to pop up at your house unannounced sometimes, because there wasn't, the habit of calling before you came. There were no phones, for the most part back then. So they would just come and knock, or they would make plans when they were at a function together at church, or they bumped into each other at the market, and they would stop by for a cup of coffee. And, they didn't have much, but maybe someone would bring by a plate of something homemade, cookies, muffins, what have you, and they would get together that way. And, there was a lot of playing of musical instruments and singing and things like that. I know my grandfather played the violin, so he would play the violin for his family. He had one that he had brought over from Italy, and, everybody would dance and sing and have a great old time. They'd sit around, they'd play cards and things like that. They'd listen to their favorite radio show together after they got ready for bed at night. So, that was nice. People would visit quite a lot, and families would spend a lot of time together. Um, People knew how to have conversations with each other. They couldn't hide behind a text or the tech or an app or something like that. They'd get cards and send them. They'd write letters to each other. I feel like all of this is lost in all the technology, and it's a shame, right? I know for me, in the past 20 years, I miss phone calls. I mean, we don't really call each other anymore, and some people will get aggravated if you call them. They'll be like, why couldn't you just text that? Well, maybe because I miss human interaction. Maybe because I want to hear your voice because I care about you and I miss you, and we don't get to spend much time together, right? So in that way, I feel it's been a detriment. And it's definitely more expensive to have all of this stuff. Of course, there's lots of positives about technology. I also think it's a valuable thing, but I think we should limit ourselves to how much technology we expose ourselves to, on a daily basis. I think sometimes we just got to put the phones down and interact with each other. All the apps, okay, they're fun, but you don't have to be on them. They don't have to control your life. I know several people who were like, oh, I have to see how many people liked my posts on, whatever app. I'm not going to mention any of them. I don't want to badmouth them because, like I said, there's good and there's bad things about social media. Not to go too far into it, but I think sometimes our kids are victims of, bullying through these apps. And the problem with that is that they can't get away from the bullying. Back when I was in school in the 80s and in the 90s, and I'm sure for those of you who were in school decades before that, if you had a hard time at school, you had a bad day, there was a bunch of jerks giving you a hard time, you could just go home and escape into your own little world, and you could decompress and escape from it. Well, now these poor kids can't. So, it just follows them, and that's why, teen suicide is on the rise. So I don't want to stray too far from my original topic, but I mean, that's been on my mind as well. But there weren't so many expenses back in those times. And, even in the 80s, when I was a little girl, in the 70s, when I was, a toddler and whatnot, and even in the 90s, there weren't all these expenses. It was just a much simpler way of life. And so you learn to do with very little sometimes, and I just know that if you're struggling, like I know I have struggles, but I also know that I'm very fortunate. I am so grateful for everything that I have, let me tell you. I am so grateful that we have the resources that we do these days, social services and the food pantries. What a blessing they are, and all the volunteers who help with all of these organizations that help with food pantries, soup kitchens, all of that, and even organizations who give out free clothes to those who need. We even have a feminine products pantry that happens once a month in our community, and many do. So, I am very grateful for all of those resources. And if you're in need, don't feel ashamed to call 211, look online for resources in your community. Don't go hungry. Don't be ashamed. So, all I can say really is we're going to get through it. We're going to get through it together. There might be hard times. Things can be difficult. We might have to, tighten our belts to the point where we almost can't breathe. Hopefully it won't be that bad. One way to get through it is just to practice gratitude. It doesn't have to be a religious thing. But for me, I know that at the end of my day, I just, I say a little prayer. I give it up to God. I thank Him for all of my blessings, small and large. And that helps me to stay balanced, and because I know it could be a lot worse. And I'm hoping that it doesn't get much worse. But I am, certain that whatever happens in the future with the country, with things that are going on in the world, I know that we're all going to be okay. So just keep the faith. Like I said, utilize every resource available to you. Do not let anybody look down their nose at you. I don't know what the heck is going on with this beeping around me. Sorry, guys. As I was saying, don't let anybody look down their nose at you and make you feel ashamed because you need to go get help with food to feed your family. I can tell you from my own experience, my rent is so high, and the sad part about it is that it's not even as high as it could be if I was renting the same property today. I've been in my home for 4 years now. The rent has gone up a little bit. Thankfully, my landlords are very fair with that. But if I were to rent the same place, it could be anywhere from $400 to $700 more than it is now for that size space. And, there's parts of it that are nice, but as you guys know, and you've seen it and you've heard me talk, there's a lot of it that's very dated. So, it's frustrating. I mean, most of our income goes to pay our rent. And if it's raised any more, it would put us in some pretty dire straits. I would figure it out, but I've been trying to get some kind of housing assistance for at least 5 years. And because there's such a shortage of it and so many people are in the same boat, it's taking a long time. So, you know what? I know there are those of you who are in this boat with me. By the time we pay our rent, we pay our utilities, we don't have too much left over for groceries, unfortunately. So, the food pantry, it really helps. I have had the SNAP benefits. They were a great help. However, once my Social Security was approved, it puts me over the threshold income-wise monthly. And I do get credit for rent and certain bills, but, I'm kind of at a loss. I need that income so, I don't have to struggle quite as hard. But at the same time, the food stamps were taken away. So what I do is I'll attend the food pantries a few times a month, and the ones that I go to, they're very generous with what they give, and then I supplement that with my grocery store trips, and I try to make as much from scratch as I can because it's cheaper, it's healthier that way. So that's why. If anybody's watching this that tends to be a little judgmental about those of us who are on SNAP or utilize a food pantry, this is why we utilize a food pantry, because the cost of things are just so high and ridiculous. It's almost impossible to be able to afford life, especially for a family. We're a family of 4 right now, and we have pets, but nothing is, crazy and luxurious in our life. There's really very little fat. We just do our best. And that's all any of us can do. So like I said, if you need help, don't let yourself or your family go hungry, and go and find the help. Almost every state and every city in that state has some sort of food assistance, and if you look online or call 211, they will refer you to that help. And if anybody's going to say anything negative about it, well, that's on them, okay? If anybody gives you a hard time because you have Medicaid and you have to attend, a Medicaid clinic, or, nobody's going to know, first of all, if you go and you pick up some donated clothes for nothing. You got to keep yourself dressed, right? You got to keep yourself healthy. So like I said, use those resources. Why not? Of course, there are always people who abuse the system, But I find, just from my experience, that 80% of us are not abusing the system. So anybody who does, well, those of us who need the services, we can't do anything about them, and shame on them. They'll meet their maker someday, and, well, karma's a bitch, right? So, anyway, I don't want to go on too long. I've already gone on for about 15 minutes. There's lots that I could say. I think I've said it all for this topic this morning. But in every day, try to help you with life struggles. Like I said earlier, just try to find one good thing and focus on that. If you've had a really bad day, there's always something good about every day. Something. And just focus on that and be grateful for that. And sometimes when you focus on that one good thing, all the other good things come into light. And then you realize, oh, well, thank you for my family. Thank you for my children. Thank you for my friends. Thank you for the roof over my head. Thank you for my health. Thank you for the food I had on my table today. Thank you for the help that I got today. Thank you for the sun that kept me warm today. Different things like that. Everybody's got something to be grateful for. It will really change your life. Remember, we're all going to make it through whatever turbulent times are ahead of us, just like every other generation did. I hope that this has helped some of you. As always, I'm sending love from New Jersey. I hope that you guys have a wonderful day. Oh, and by the way, it's my 52nd birthday. Not bad for 52, right, guys? Anyway, have a wonderful day, my friends. I look forward to seeing you soon. Please share, like, and subscribe. It really helps my channel grow.